Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe and explore. They had taken contracts like this before: winter clearance work, small bid forestry jobs with enough downtime for smoke breaks and bad coffee. The grove stood just west of the county line, a dozen miles from the closest gas station, where the hills choked reception and everything smelled faintly of wet iron. No trails marked the rise where the oldest trees stood. Just moss, ankle-deep, and trunks that swallowed light. By mid-morning, saws had already taken down 4 leaners. Bark peeled clean. No rot. Sound timber. One of the crew lit a cigarette against a falling wind while the others measured distance for the 5th cut, a massive Douglas fir, older than any of them, maybe all of them combined. Its base had absorbed 3 smaller stumps. One man muttered something about Godroot. No one responded. The chainsaw started clean, bit deep into the side just below the notch, and kicked hard. Not from a knot. Not from buried stone. Steel teeth caught on something that didn't give or yield, just stopped the blade cold. Silence pressed in for a moment, long enough for the man holding the saw to feel his heartbeat where his gloves ended. He stepped back. No one said anything. They just looked at the opening. Rough, uneven, clean sap clinging to fresh fibers. The inner grain was darker than it should have been. A few inches in, something white jutted through the cambium wall. Not smooth like quartz. Not splintered like fungus. Curved, patterned. A ridge. A hollow. Clean symmetry impossible in bark. Another man leaned in. Tapped it with a stick. The stick cracked. No one called it a rib at first. Not aloud. But one of them pulled out his phone, tried for a picture. The flash lit something deeper inside. More white shapes, spiraled, packed inward like the body had curled before the tree had grown around it. There was no odor. No insects. The crew backed away without speaking. By afternoon, 2 patrol cars edged their tires into the clearing. No sirens. No tape. Just low voices and slow glances. The sheriff didn't touch it. He crouched, scratched at his beard, made a call. A conservation officer arrived an hour later, followed by a woman in brown boots who didn't introduce herself. No one laughed, not even the new ones. They dug around the base. No burial site. No sign of the tree having been hollowed or planted with anything foreign. Growth rings matched the tree's projected age, over 200 years. The body had been there long enough to be part of it. The woman from the university stayed past sundown, taking samples, speaking quietly to herself as she traced one of the ribs with a gloved finger. She asked for a tarp, then changed her mind. Asked for silence, then didn't seem to notice when one of the loggers broke down and left without his gear. By nightfall, headlights cut through low fog. The road out was gravel and tight. The back of the flatbed held the trunk section, cut wide around the embedded remains. No lights touched the interior. Someone threw a blanket over it, not for protection, but because no one wanted to keep looking. The woman rode in the back, alone. She kept one hand on the wood the entire trip. Not to steady it. She just didn't want it shifting in the dark. Nobody spoke during unloading. The wood groaned against metal as it shifted off the flatbed, weight uneven from where the cut had widened around the chest cavity. It took 3 men and a dolly to move it across the service ramp. Rain had dried, but the surface beneath the wheels stayed damp. Inside the biology lab, fluorescent lights hummed above sealed glass walls. Linoleum gripped saws tight, every step sounding too sharp. Instruments clicked on, displays warming, sensors blinking to life with unreadable code. The woman in brown boots moved first, unwrapping the tarp with slow precision. Layers peeled back until grain met light again. Dark, ridged, scarred in strange, organic fractures that looked almost deliberate. A camera lens focused. The flash revealed more bone than anyone remembered. Not just ribs. A full spine now visible where the bark had thinned overnight. Too much exposure. Too fast. A technician stepped in closer, muttering about mold spread or sap reaction. He didn't finish the sentence. One of the ribs moved. Just slightly. Not from weight shift. Not from air current. The movement repeated, Small, shallow, like breath taken without lungs. Silence followed, drawn tight across the room. A second rib adjusted outward, lifting a fraction, enough to cast shadow against the interior wall. No heartbeat. No circulation. Just motion. She stepped closer, holding a temperature probe against the trunk's center. Warmth pulsed through the probe's casing. Not ambient. Not retained from transport. Internal generation. The tree was alive. But the wood was too dry. The bone too pale. She recorded time, temperature, rate of displacement. No one wanted to blink. A graduate assistant activated the spectrometer, pulling in particle count. Numbers climbed quickly. Carbon dioxide levels near the log rose in precise rhythm. Inhale, pause, exhale. Always the same duration. Always returning to zero baseline. Like a breath, starting over without fatigue. No surface decay. No cellular degradation. The skeleton should have collapsed under its own brittleness. Instead, the wood around it remained flexible, warm, swollen slightly with each recorded breath. Another worker adjusted the audio sensors. There it was. Not wind. Not pipes. Not faulty equipment. A slow, repeating pattern that matched the exhale of a human diaphragm. Regular, consistent, without variation. 4 seconds in. 2 seconds hold. 4 seconds out. The log had no cavity. No opening for air. The rhythm wasn't being generated by lungs. It was being simulated. Maintained. Preserved. A technician leaned in to speak but didn't get the words out. His eyes were locked on the bark above the ribcage. Tiny lines formed there, curling inwards like growing rings drawn too fast. The woman pressed her hand against the wood. Warmth again. Not heat from light or contact. This came from inside. Like breath shared through something not designed to share it. Nobody left the room for another hour. The sound didn't change. It didn't fade. It stayed with them. Matched their breathing until they could no longer tell which one was theirs. Imaging began just before sunrise. The lab's overheads dimmed to reduce interference, but the breathing persisted without falter, filling the silence between keystrokes and hushed exchange. The trunk segment was positioned upright, cradled in an isolation cradle built for specimens half its weight. It didn't shift. It didn't respond. But the air around it kept thinning, oxygen readings dropping by microunits every 10 minutes, barely enough to sound alarms but enough for the lungs of those nearby to tighten without explanation. Infrared scans lit the surface first. Heat mapped itself not along bark but through the skeletal frame, outlining every ridge and depression in glowing bands. Something circulated through those cavities, something moving, faint but traceable. Not blood. Not lymph. A separate flow, pulsing inside bone, matching the intervals of breath. The spine carried the strongest signal. From base to upper cervical notch, a trail of warmth bent in shallow arcs like veins branching from marrow that had never turned to dust. Further up, near the clavicle, the pattern changed, became Messier, angled wrong, intersecting without anatomical logic. One of the research assistants noticed thin lines bleeding into the wood grain surrounding the ribcage. On closer read, those weren't cracks. They were vascular. The cellulose around the bones had taken shape, narrow canals linking femur to outer trunk, radius to lower rings. Cross-sections showed chambers forming between fiber layers, like something had forced pathways where none belonged. Not random. Not artifact. These conduits pulled heat, retained it, cycled it in pulses. The skeletal core no longer sat embedded in wood. It was merged. Bone carried by growth. Bone shaping growth in return. Where a lung should have rested, there was nothing but hollow void. But the ribs lifted again, slight as before, and with them came that soft interior hiss. Air without entrance, sound without source. X-rays followed. Every scan returned the same structural mystery. No soft tissue. No cartilage. No trace of muscle. But joints held form, vertebrae stayed suspended. The body hadn't collapsed under age or absence. Every component maintained spacing as if braced from within by something unseen. One of the assistants proposed environmental absorption. Suggested the tree had grown around a long-buried corpse and, over time, integrated its mineral deposits. The theory didn't hold. No standard growth could create symmetrical internal chambers in lignin. No passive system could form those heat-conductive corridors. It wasn't reactive. It had intent behind arrangement. More scans. More waiting. The breathing continued. Slight increase in volume, barely above machine hum, but enough to draw attention when no one was speaking. Spectral software tried mapping resonance points. The signal didn't stay in one place. It shifted subtly with each breath, like something inside repositioned, just slightly, on every inhale. Attempts to interrupt the cycle failed. Noise interference didn't register. Controlled heat fluctuations changed nothing. One technician switched the console to live overlay, hoping for anomalies. The screen blinked, then showed an unmistakable image. A root stem threaded through the lumbar curve, splitting into branches at the pelvis. Each end terminated in cellular bloom too uniform for randomness. The structure mimicked a nervous system. One of the team stepped back from the console. Her voice came out too soft, nearly lost under the lab's hum. She asked when it had stopped being a tree. No one answered. Searches returned nothing useful. No reports matched the shape in the tree. No names flagged in state or federal registries. Every database produced silence. No missing persons listed within 20 miles of the grove since before aerial surveys began. Files from local law enforcement showed nothing but traffic stops and poaching violations. Births outpaced deaths by 2 to 1. No unresolved disappearances. No complaints. No context. It was the ranger station that changed everything. A graduate assistant found it by accident while reviewing soil erosion map. 2 miles south of the logging site, buried beneath decades of pinefall, the stone structure still stood. Fire-scarred, roof partially collapsed, but its main room remained intact. Walls held hooks for gear. One side had rusted piping. In the back, an iron stove with no door. Above it, a shelf warped by weather. Resting there was a journal, spine broken, cover wrapped in plastic once used for meal rations. Inside, 24 pages. No title. No name. Just dates and entries spaced without order. Most were fragments, single sentences, incomplete thoughts. Some crossed out. A few torn clean through. One passage repeated. Dreams again. Woke up choking. Can't scream. Mouth full of leaves. Nothing in my throat but I couldn't breathe. Second time this week. Trees watching. Farther down, a different hand. No birds this morning. Sound gone after midnight. Air thick. Wind moves but doesn't touch skin. Felt ribs move that don't belong to me. Last page held a single line. The roots remember what the wind forgets. No one recognized the handwriting. Forensic scan turned up nothing. Ink had bled through some pages, water damaged, but one symbol remained unblurred, a drawing near the margin, barely an inch long. Circular pattern, with shallow arcs surrounding a central ring. Looked like a seed. Or an eye. Or something still inside waiting to be named. The grove mentioned matched coordinates on the original harvest map. Same elevation. Same soil signature. An area untouched by replanting. Some trees there had fused together at the base, bark twisted as if competing for space underground. A separate note found near the stove listed maintenance logs. Last entry dated 1954. Nothing marked after that. One researcher compared dendrochronology data to the tree segment in the lab. That year stood out. Ring density spiked. Mineral influx tripled. Iron traces appeared for the first time, trapped inside lignin, unnatural in origin. Another pointed out that the journal's phrasing matched the pattern of speech in the breathing pulses. Same timing. Same rhythm. Nobody asked who had written it. Not out loud. Some questions pulled too hard when left alone. Motion sensor tripped at 3:14 a.m. The alert pinged twice, short bursts, followed by a silent log entry in the monitoring terminal. No door opened. No keycard registered. No climate fluctuation. Surveillance played back in real time, frame by frame. Nothing moved outside. Inside, something had changed. The log stood exactly where it had been placed the night before. Same lighting, same camera angle. But along the upper seam, where bark met exposed bone, the surface had split another half-inch. Not a break. Not damage from humidity. A widening. Clean separation. No splinters. No sound. Yet visible in 2 consecutive frames. At 3 hours 14 minutes and 8 seconds the seam was closed. At 3 hours 14 minutes and 9 seconds it was not. Security technician dismissed it as wood tension, logged the anomaly, went home by sunrise. Nothing flagged for maintenance. Later that morning, one of the students entered the lab early, hoping to recheck audio files for misread frequencies. She stayed 37 minutes. No one else joined her. Upon exiting, she signed her name on the clearance form with unsteady script, lines breaking mid-letter. When asked why, she mentioned hearing something inside the room. Not over the speakers. Not through headphones. In the air itself. Breathing at first, as before. Familiar. Measured. But beneath it something new. Sound shaped like words, too slow to understand. Fragments spoken just below the rhythm of lungs. She didn't report it immediately. She didn't want to be the one who heard something no one else could prove. By noon, the recordings were pulled from the system. Raw spectrographic files were isolated, compressed, rerun through deep frequency isolation. Background room tones stripped away. Electrical hums removed. What remained repeated every 72 seconds. 3 syllables. No pitch inflection. No clear source. Too low for the human ear to detect unaided. Translated to waveform, the shapes resembled speech cadence, but lacked recognizable phonetic. One technician matched the timing to lab schedules. Each pulse occurred only when the room was unoccupied. Time-stamped comparisons showed that any time a person entered, even briefly, the lower signal disappeared. The breathing remained. The ambient hum stayed consistent. But the embedded pattern, 3 soft syllables spaced apart by the exact length of an exhale, faded without trace. Once the room emptied again, the sound resumed. Same volume. Same spacing. Same absence of origin. No device inside the room could transmit audio. No wireless signals active. No external connection permitted. Someone suggested recording silence over a full hour, leaving the lights dimmed, all equipment locked. Just static on loop. Passive surveillance. Minimal disruption. At the 26-minute mark, one of the monitors froze. Restarted. Jumped back 6 seconds. Replay showed the log unmoved. Yet the seam widened again. This time further. Exposure spread up toward the collarbone. Under infrared, sap ran along one of the ribs like sweat caught beneath skin. Another waveform emerged. Longer. 5 syllables. Slower. A technician played it aloud, converting pitch into audible range. The lab stayed quiet for the rest of the day. No further entries logged until morning. No one volunteered to stay past closing. The temperature near the specimen had risen by 3 degrees. Not lab-wide. Only at the core. The breathing matched the student's resting pattern, recorded the day before. No explanation offered. No theory held longer than a sentence. The syllables came again. Always when the room emptied. Always with breath. She stayed past midnight. No one asked her to. No record of extended access requests, no flagged entry. Just a single keycard swipe at 11:42 p.m. recorded, logged, confirmed. No exit. No return. The timestamp marked her as present. Security footage showed the interior exactly as it had been hours earlier. Lights low, equipment idle, specimen unmoved. No sign of conflict. No damage to the room. No motion apart from environmental drift. She had been reviewing spectrogram overlays, matching pitch against linguistic cadences, searching for patterns inside the vocal anomalies. A secondary mic had been installed to capture non-mechanical resonance. It had recorded 7 hours of ambient feed. Only the final 46 minutes remained stored. The rest overwritten. She didn't return home. Phone unresponsive. Messages unanswered. Car still in the lot, keys missing. Her supervisor submitted a report by noon. Campus authorities pulled footage. 6 angles. No discrepancies. No shadow. No figure. Only absence. One presence in, none out. Audio team reviewed the backup files. Low-volume noise continued throughout. Breathing consistent. Slow. Familiar. At 37 minutes in, the pattern shifted. Breathing grew softer, layered with another signal. Longer waveforms. Mouth sounds indistinct. Faint consonant pairs. The sound was human. Gender matched. Cadence matched. Spectral signature aligned. Voice strain increased over time. Phrases repeated, broken by long gap. 2 syllables, stop. 3 syllables, pause. 6 seconds of silence. Start again. Analysts enhanced the waveform. The voice wasn't reading. It was remembering. A technician listening on loop caught a partial phrase. Spoke it aloud without thinking. The roots remember what the wind forgets. Silence followed. No one moved. Back in the lab, temperature held 5 degrees above standard. No fault logged. Environmental controls had not engaged. Manual override failed. The area surrounding the specimen was warmer than the rest of the room by a full degree. Security ran facial detection frame by frame, desperate for confirmation. No match. Final audio timestamp aligned with her last recorded breath. Captured by wearable vitals monitor. Heart rate fell off at 12:39 a.m. Signal dropped without spike. No panic. No stress. Just a disappearance into nothing. The last spoken words were hers. Same rhythm. Same voice. Same phrase written in the journal decades before. Speech overlaid perfectly with the breath of the specimen. Each syllable pulled from her mouth as if it had never belonged to her. The first blade dulled within seconds. High-torque carbide teeth meant for rock and composite met nothing harder than cellulose, yet edge degraded with unnatural speed. A second blade followed, identical result. No visible resistance point. No knots. No grit in the grain. Just smooth wood with a surface that refused to stay cut. Sliced portions rejoined at the seam within minutes, bonds tighter than before. Attempts to core the interior with surgical drills triggered equipment lockout. Bearings seized. Motors overheated. Lubricants boiled. Replacement tools cracked without impact. Thermal imaging captured surface cooling immediately after pressure was removed, as if the material refused to retain stress. A segment trimmed from the base days earlier showed similar behavior. When sliced under vacuum, shavings curled back toward the source, clinging to the core like magnetized fibers. Within 24 hours, the wound line sealed. Cross-section discoloration faded. Rings realigned. One researcher proposed cellular mimicry, a response learned through prior damage. Another offered adaptive elasticity. Neither theory explained the mineral profile retrieved through microtome shaving. Growth rings post 1954 showed unbroken continuity, but the spacing defied age estimation. Annual gaps grew wider, no drought or flood cycles visible. Consistent growth at triple expected rate. Between select rings, dark layers surfaced. Not natural pigment. Iron traces. Ferric oxide embedded without bleed. Metallic consistency increased toward the center. Keratin deposits followed. Not from bark. Not environmental. Human level match. Density too high to result from contamination. Tiny sheaths lodged between fibers. Hair filament remnants twisted among vascular tissue. Deeper still, microscopic ridges. Latent oils. Organic whorls patterned like fingerprints. Not prints left on the surface, prints grown inside the wood. Pressure formed. Epithelial signature absent. No skin. No flesh. Only the indentation of presence. The assumption of absorption no longer held. This wasn't a tree swallowing what had fallen into it. This wasn't passive consumption or fossil preservation. No foreign object rested within an ancient body. The tree had constructed the form from within. Not a vessel, a host. Each rib aligned with cambial fractures too symmetrical for chance. Vertebrae mirrored internal channels where fluid once moved, repurposed to hold shape. The pelvis sat above a thickened root base that matched pelvic symmetry in tension pattern and mass offset. Root tips pressed outward at angles identical to femoral articulation. No deviation. No variance. As if the architecture had been planned from seed. No growth followed this precision in any other part of the trunk. Not above. Not below. Only the section housing bone showed intelligent structure. Elsewhere, wood aged naturally. Bark cracked, flaked, bled resin in cold. But around the ribs, sap pooled with unnatural clarity, odorless, clean, and warm. One researcher whispered that this was not integration. Not memory encased in rings. The rings were instructions. Not a grave. A blueprint. Not remains. A design still running. The breathing was no longer alone. When the waveform widened, it left marks no one expected. Subaudible frequencies ran parallel to the primary pulse, not distortion, not feedback. Speech, buried in the rhythm, not layered on top. Voice without throat, only carried inside pattern. Audio mapping pulled apart the breath and found fragments, phonemes twisted by pressure, not volume. Not words spoken aloud. Words pushed through repetition. 3 terms surfaced first. Soft, loop. Each voiced by a different source. None matched staff on file. Each syllable bore gender distinction. Female range, variable pitch. Not voice actors. Not recordings. No repeatable media source. Just resonance embedded in timing. Help. Buried. Still here. The sequence never altered. Words never dropped. Only spacing changed. On longer loops, more identities surfaced. 6 in total. Each voice emerged from its own pattern of exhalation, fading only when the room grew crowded. The system responded to silence. Not absence of equipment. Human silence. No motion. No questions. Once, during a full lab evacuation drill, the spectrogram shifted violently. Waveforms fractured. Peaks split in tight succession. A name appeared. Spelled phonetically through stress markers. One of the researchers. She hadn't entered that day. Hadn't spoken aloud for hours. Still, the log repeated her name 12 times, each time softer, closer to matching her speech rate during intake interviews. The pattern became mimicry. Breath timing altered subtly, minute by minute. Pulse-to-hold ratios changed. Resting intervals lengthened. A side-by-side overlay showed it clearly. The rhythm wasn't random anymore. It mirrored the signature captured from the student who hadn't come back. Respiratory irregularities matched. Breath hold duration. Micro-tremor in the exhale. A brief double pause after the third cycle. Identical to her clinical baseline. The log breathed like her. Her voice joined the others, not through playback, but through absorption. Vocal fingerprint identified without question. The phrase she had repeated, roots and wind, emerged again, this time in her vocal tone, faintly strained, as if spoken through cloth. She was not heard. She was present. Other names followed. Each researcher logged on site appeared in subsequent analysis. Their names stretched inside exhale, not in full, just enough to pull attention. Each syllable mimicked pitch contours specific to their speech. Not coincidence. Not resemblance. Repetition. Precision drawn from listening, not hearing. A technician ran error checks. System clear. Mics functional. Recorders clean. The voices kept coming. Breathing stopped for 10 minutes on a Wednesday afternoon. Complete silence. No movement. No wave. Every channel flatlined. Equipment flagged no malfunctions. External sensors showed ambient pressure unchanged. No heat drop. Just stillness. At 4:36 p.m., respiration resumed. Same volume. Same pacing. Same pitch. Only one difference. The rhythm was no longer general. It was hers. Down to every irregular pause. Down to the way her breath used to catch before turning toward a question. It hadn't just taken her voice. It remembered how she breathed when she wasn't speaking. When no one else listened. When she thought she was alone. The room was cleared in less than an hour. No internal memo circulated. No student notification. The file was pulled from open access, marked incomplete, reassigned under archive code not listed on the main registry. The specimen was not discarded. It was transferred. A vault beneath the east wing had stood unused since the refrigeration unit failed 8 years earlier. Originally designed for cold-stored tissue samples, it had been stripped for equipment but retained its triple-seal doors and foundation-deep concrete casing. No windows. No ventilation to the upper floors. Temperature regulated manually. No external network connection. Chosen not for security, but for silence. The trunk was moved without notice. Only 2 individuals signed off on transport. No custodial involvement. No tracking numbers logged into university systems. 4 metal cases were marked hazardous chemical waste to mask the load. The breathing remained audible during descent through service corridors, muffled but present. Equipment used during transport was decommissioned after delivery. No devices were brought back up. The door was closed at 2:19 a.m. After that, no one entered. 2 weeks passed. Nothing logged. No reports issued. At 6:03 a.m. on a Monday, a janitor radioed the maintenance office to report a smell in the subbasement. Not chemical. Not rot. Not cleaning fluid. Warm air pushed from the base of the east wall near the drain channel. A second janitor touched the wall and pulled away quickly. Not scalding, but warmer than skin. No pipes ran through that section. No wiring. No boiler exhaust. Another report followed 3 days later. Hairline cracks had appeared across the floor near the eastern foundation. Cement chipped at angles too shallow for pressure fractures. Something had pushed upward, nothing large but enough to distort the tile. A root had emerged through one of the seams. Thin, white, flexible. No visible bark. No scent. It was cut. By morning it had returned. This time 2 more followed. Narrow, branching, clean. The camera in the service hallway was wiped manually 2 days after that. The footage cut off at 3:46 a.m., resumed at 3:47 with the timestamp corrected but 1 frame skip. The only file corrupted on the drive. Custodial crew began skipping the east corridor. 1 student assistant sent to inventory the freezer area left without logging entry. When questioned, she didn't describe anything visual. Just sound. Not through the air, but through the floor. Beneath the tile. Rhythmic. Familiar. The word she used was breathing. Another staff member placed a hand on the wall to test temperature. He stood there longer than necessary. When asked why, he didn't respond. Just turned and left. Others tried. Same result. The wall was warm. Consistently. No variance. Multiple temperature readings confirmed a rise of 4 degrees in one corner. On the 5th attempt, someone pressed their ear against the metal panel near the base, above the original cut point. The listening lasted longer than the others allowed. When he stepped back, his mouth stayed open for several seconds. Nothing said. When asked what he'd heard, he repeated one phrase. He said it spoke his name. Not whispered. Not screamed. Just spoken. Same voice he used to hear when calling home. Same rhythm his mother once used when waking him as a child. The vault remained closed. No attempts made to retrieve the specimen. Breathing continued. Always from the same corner. No sound reached the upper floors. But the roots never stopped moving. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.